to do that as we go through. Today, we're going to talk about hormones briefly. And what I'm going to do is explain to you what's called the hormone hierarchy when it comes to your metabolism. So this is pretty confusing. And I actually just had a great consultation with a lady 3 days ago. And her question was like, listen, like I follow, respected authorities in the online space, and everything they're telling me, Jen, is that hormones don't matter when it comes to weight loss. And at the end of the day, it all boils down to calories. And I said, you're eating, at this point, she was eating 1,000 calories a day, exercising, at least she was paying attention, like getting an extra 500 calories burned per day. Was not only not losing weight, but her waistline, she sent me pictures, like waistline is just growing at this point. And she's like, how is this possible? And I'm like, okay, well, if the only thing that matters is calories, you would be losing weight, correct? She's like, yeah, you would think, right? I'm like, yeah, that's because both calories and hormones matter. You need both of them. It's not one or the other, and they work together. Because if you think about it, and we're going to go through it, I'll explain to you like how this works. But if you are not hormonally balanced, that was the other thing she had an issue with. Like your hormones are never like in this perfect like balance. They move around, right? But if they're balanced and optimized, then you are not going to have big hunger and craving issues, right? Like, so it's hard to be in a deficit if you're always hungry. It's hard to be in a deficit if your energy is in the toilet, right? So we want those things to work together. And when it comes to the metabolism, there is a hierarchy on how all of this works and the things that you need to focus on. Now, one of the things that she and I talked about is that a lot of women, once they start hitting this kind of midlife, perimenopause into menopause, what they think when they're talking about hormones, what they mean is sex hormones. You have over 50 hormones in your body, not just your estrogen and your progesterone. And what you'll see as we go through this today, estrogen and progesterone can affect your body's ability to burn fat, but it's like a small amount. The reality is that it can be directly responsible for maybe 3 to 5 pounds of weight gain. And that's about it. Now, it can be indirectly responsible, and we'll talk about that as we go through. So let me pull this up really quick so you guys can see what I'm talking about. There we go. All right, just gotta go back and share my screen. Got it. And there we go. Hopefully you guys can see this all okay. Yes, good, thumbs up. All right. Okay, so let's go into, oops, move this over so you guys can see this. So we're going to talk about hormones, but we're going to talk about the foundational four, the four hormones that matter the most when it comes to your metabolic system. The first two are kind of connected, and they are ghrelin and leptin. They basically are your hunger and craving hormones. So ghrelin, it's easy to remember the two because ghrelin, makes me hungry. So if your ghrelin is up, you're hungry, right? Leptin is your satiation hormone. So you guys are going to see this. I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole, but you'll see when you're seeing stuff out there about the new weight loss drugs, right? One of the things that they do is they help leptin and ghrelin. They alter those to where you're just not hungry anymore. I don't want to, again, go down too deep of a rabbit hole, but that's what that does. And so there are things that you can do to actually alter those hormones so that you can do that. It's like a lifestyle thing, right? We're going to talk about how to do that. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to go into a deficit if you're battling hunger and you're battling cravings. So those are the first two that we're always going to look at right out of the gate, like what's going on with your ghrelin and leptin. And also the reverse side of that is I get a lot of women who will say, I'm just not hungry, right? That is an indication of what your metabolism is doing. So we do want a certain level of hunger. We don't want you not ever hungry. So those are the first two that we're always going to look at. Then the second two are insulin and cortisol, and they will have an effect on hunger, cravings, energy level, sleep, digestion. And because remember, hormones are messengers, they send a message, they send a signal to various parts of your body that say, do this. And if your hormones are saying, hey, this is not a good environment for me to be burning fat, AKA eating myself. Think of it that way, right? Like little Pac-Man teeth, that's what you're asking your body to do is eat itself, right? It's not going to do that when you're in a high stress situation. So those two will affect not only the biofeedback is what we call them, hunger, cravings, energy, sleep, digestion. Those are some of them. It's also going to send a signal whether you are in fat storage or fat burning. And so we want to be able to balance those out. The biggest impact actions that you can take to be able to balance those out. And again, I use this picture, but just keep in mind, there's no like 100% balance, right? Like there's no one point that we want to hit. And this is where you'll hear a lot of people push back on like testing doesn't matter because hormones are always changing. And my answer to that is, yeah, they are always changing, but why would you measure glucose? Why are you measuring fasting insulin? Why are you measuring lipids? All of those change all of the time. The reason that we test is not to see a single marker. We're looking at all of the markers and how they're interacting with each other, and then we retest to see what's going on so that we get a story. So it is a little misleading, but it worked. All right, biggest impact actions. When it comes to managing those four and nutrition, here's what we're going to look at. Number one, the nutrition big three. Do you guys remember what those are? Who can put it in the chat? Let's see if anybody remembers. The nutrition big three. Do you guys remember what they are? Anybody? Anybody? Give you guys a second. The nutrition big three. There's three of them, and they have the biggest effect on those four hormones. They are water, protein, and fiber. And the reason, let's see, somebody jumped in there. Protein is one. Water, Jan, good job. Jan got both of them, two of them. So you got 2 out of the 3. Alicia, how do we know what hormones to test? When we go in 2 days, you might actually, I've got an ebook for you that I'm going to give you guys access to. I'm going to show you what it looks like today. It'll give you part of it. And then I'm going to fill in the rest on Thursday so you guys know exactly what to test. Good question, right? FYI, your practitioner probably will not test everything that you really need, but I'll give you a list. All right, guys. So your nutrition big three: water, protein, and fiber. And the reason that those are important is that they're going to help balance blood sugar, and they're going to keep you very satiated. And when those things happen, your energy levels are more stable. So that's what we want with those nutrition big three. Your meal timing, your frequency. It's why in the challenge, we're not skipping meals. I'm not paying attention to your calories. What I am saying is like, let's teach your body that you're going to feed it on a regular basis, because when you skip meals, your blood sugar drops. And when blood sugar drops, cortisol comes in to push it back up. They work together. They do this, right? So we don't want this. We don't want cortisol coming up at 3 a.m. because you're going to wake up, right? And we don't want insulin having to push cortisol down, right? We want them even, and then we want your cortisol to be in its natural circadian rhythm. And meal frequency is going to help with that. Now, once you become someone who is metabolically flexible, you can play with that a little bit, but in the beginning, until that happens, we really want that frequency and the meal timing. It's why I have you guys eating 3 meals and 1 snack, and then adequate fueling. And what that means is that if you're always in deprivation mode, that is going to affect these 3 hormones. It's actually going to slow down your metabolism. So we want adequate fueling, getting enough calories so that your metabolism is not in a stressed state. Make sense? Questions so far? Good. So those are the things we want to focus on when it comes to nutrition. Now, when it comes to movement and exercise, what we're looking for are 2 main things that are going to affect these first 4 hormones. And it doesn't mean that there's not things outside of this, but these are the most important when you're starting out. Number 1 is leisure walking, and number 2 is strength training, and in that order. Now, the problem is that most people, when it comes to losing weight, they think, oh, I've got to exercise, I've got to burn calories. And what they're not focusing on is what their metabolism is actually doing. It's an internal job. So here's the benefit of leisure walking. And we're going to talk about something called NEAT tomorrow. But leisure walking is one way that you can get your body to burn more calories without your metabolism feeling threatened by that. So you can do a lot of walking and your metabolism will not release hunger hormones because you're a human. You're supposed to move, you're supposed to walk. So your metabolism doesn't feel threatened by that. Your metabolism will feel threatened by exercise because you're burning a higher amount of calories in a short amount of time. So exercise will actually increase hunger hormones, right? So what we want is balance. So we focus on leisure walking because that will get us to burn a few more calories, right? So that's beneficial. But in addition to that, leisure walking is going to do two things from a hormonal perspective. Number one, it's going to help lower stress hormones. Leisure walking, not cardio walking. Leisure walking, particularly out in nature, is going to help lower those stress hormones, which is important. The other thing that leisure walking is going to do is it's going to help those cells become more insulin sensitive. And I know that's kind of confusing. Sometimes you probably have heard insulin resistance. And what that means is that those cells become resistant to the message of insulin. So as we talked about before, when you eat food, that food turns into glucose. Now, how much of it depends on how much you eat and what you're eating, right? Well, insulin is then released to take that glucose and shuttle it, knock on the door of the cell and say, open up and use this glucose. Well, based on lifestyle and nutrition, right, and age, those cells can become resistant to that message. So they're basically deaf-earing insulin's message to open up. So it doesn't open up and use that insulin, right? So then that glucose gets circulating throughout your system and starts to cause problems. Over time, that can lead to things like diabetes, heart disease, and Alzheimer's, right? So, and on the other side of that, you have to think about it as a system. If the muscle or the cells on the other side have become resistant to that message, internally they're going, but we do need insulin. So they'll send a signal back up to your brain and go, hey, we need insulin. So then it'll send a signal down to your pancreas and your pancreas will release even more insulin because it's saying the cells need it. The cells are deaf-earing the message at the same time. And that's how that cycle starts. As we start going into perimenopause and we start going into menopause, what happens is because of estrogen coming back down, our cells become more insulin resistant just by aging, right? Leisure walking helps those cells become more sensitive to that message. So they'll start to open back up and use that insulin and the glucose to help repair. That makes sense, right? So that's why we want the leisure walking. Yes, it'll burn more calories, but it's also going to help lower stress hormones. And yes, it's going to help us become more insulin sensitive. Strength training is important when we're looking at it from a hormonal standpoint, not just burning calories, because strength training is going to help us preserve, if not grow muscle. And the more muscle you have, we learned this the other day, the higher your natural metabolism. But also, strength training, those muscles will demand that insulin. They will demand that. And so they're like a big old insulin sponge, right? It's one of the fastest ways to get somebody's blood sugar down is get them lifting weights because the muscle will then go in and go, hey, I need this insulin, and it'll just pull it right through. And that's why we want that. So when we're looking at it from a movement standpoint, that's the priority. Leisure walking and strength training. Doesn't mean you don't do cardio. It just means that from a hormonal standpoint, it's not the priority. Make sense? Questions? You guys can jump in and ask questions as we go if you have any. But we're going to keep going. So that's from a movement exercise standpoint. And then when we look at it from a lifestyle standpoint, the biggest impact actions that you can take are prioritizing sleep. I can tell you anytime I'm working with a client and we're looking at their something called biofeedback, right? The hormonal biofeedback. If sleep is off, it's always the first thing that we solve for. Always. Because sleep affects everything else. Sleep affects cravings, it affects hunger, it affects your motivation, right? Like it affects your insulin and cortisol levels, like it affects everything. It's where everything gets repaired. So we have to prioritize sleep. And yes, everybody's a little bit different, right? But I would say the average is anywhere from 7 to 9 hours per night of restful sleep. So kickboxing once a week is still okay because I would hate to stop that. Yeah. It all boils down, Alicia, to whether or not you are recovering. So tomorrow we're going to talk about that hormonal feedback, and I'm going to teach you guys how to learn what your hormones are saying. At the end of the day, if you're doing something that you love and you're not getting any negative feedback from it, any negative hormonal feedback from it, absolutely do it. 100%. I used to do kickboxing too. Actually took from Billy Blank, so it was super fun. So yeah, keep taking it. Tomorrow, again, I'll teach you how to pay attention to what your hormones are saying. So we got to prioritize sleep. I would say it really, and this is something that I struggled with for a long time, and I just had to buckle down and be like, listen, my brain needs a sleep, right? I am someone who wants to perform at a very high level during the day. And also background, like I have a family history, my mom, my grandma, like Alzheimer's, right? And one of the best things you can do for your brain is sleep. And so for me, about 3 years ago, I was like, listen, like it's just non-negotiable now. And it took practice to figure out like how I could shut my brain off so that I could become a good sleeper. And it still takes practice, especially as I'm going through perimenopause. And sometimes I get big dips in progesterone, which is your calming hormone. But it still is like the priority for me. And it is like 9 o'clock. I'm like headed to bed. And I don't go to sleep at 9, but it's like I wash my face, I make sure everything is ready, I crawl into bed, I read, you know what I mean? Like it's like a very calming routine that I've created that I've learned to love. And it really does make the difference. So it's just about figuring out like, okay, how can I prioritize sleep? Um, and the other thing I will say too, and this comes up a lot with a lot of the women that I coach, is that because they're so busy during the day handling all of the long list of things to do, that a lot of times at like 8, 9 o'clock at night, they're like, I just have a hard time prioritizing sleep because it's literally the only time during the day where I get to just do nothing and be awake. And if I go to bed, then that means I go to sleep and it starts all over, right? I hear that a lot and I do get it. But what you will find is that when you prioritize sleep, you will be so much more productive during the day that you will find that time back if you pay attention. Everybody in the beginning balks about it. They're like, Jen, it's just so hard because it's the only time. And I'm like, I know, but if you practice it, you will find that you are more energetic and productive during the day, and you will find the 20 minutes, you'll find the 40 minutes that you can create. That's just your time. Does the quantity of REM sleep or deep sleep matter? It does. All levels of sleep have their properties, right? And so it all does matter. I will say that as you age, that deep sleep that we want, it will lessen, right? So we still want, I think they say like as you age, like 45 minutes to a little over an hour and a half, like an hour and a half. I think I get like an hour and 20 usually, right? So you just want to make sure that you're hitting it as long as you're hitting it. And I will also say this too, it's really easy to get caught up in like the numbers of sleep. It's why I stopped wearing my tracker at night and I got an Aura ring because I just didn't want to like obsess about it. And now I don't let myself log into my Aura first thing in the morning because you start to just stress about it. Like, did I sleep good? And it's like, well, you know if you did or didn't, right? Like just use it as kind of a helpful tool, but don't obsess about it. Good question. And then the second one is stress management practice. And I think this was a really hard one for me. It's hard for most of the ladies that I work with because they're very type A. And so the number one thing I get back is like, I try to meditate, but I can't. And I'm like, well, that's because you think meditation means making your brain be quiet. That's not what it means. Meditation is really just more an awareness practice of just watching and being aware of what your brain is doing. But there's different ways that you can practice stress management. And I'm going to give you guys one right now. And it's one of my favorite to do because it requires very little time. There is a physiological thing that you can do that forces your heart rate to drop. And you can use this when you're doing your leisure walking to see if you're actually leisure walking too. Anytime your exhalation is longer than your inhalation, it will force your heart rate to slow down. So if my inhalation is longer, so let's say I count, if I count my inhalation is at a 4 and my exhalation is at a 3, my heart rate is automatically going to go up. It's going to stay elevated. But if I can get my exhalation just a little bit longer than my inhalation, usually it only takes by like 1 second, right? Just that 1 second, and then you can practice on getting to 2, but even just 1 second longer, it has to do with your diaphragm and where it sits. It will force your heart rate to slow down. And when your heart rate slows down, it's going to send a signal to your brain that it needs to calm down. They work together. So for me, several times during the day, and I always use this after I work out, is I will force myself to just start focusing on my exhalation. And when you exhale, you're going to take a couple of breaths where you breathe through your mouth. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. One is, let's say I breathe into the count of 4, and then I want to breathe out to the count of 5. You breathe through your mouth, almost like you're breathing through a straw. Even though I was just talking, see how much longer I can breathe out? Because I'm pushing that through that straw, right? It slows everything down. The other thing that you can do, so that's one practice. The other thing that you can do is what is called a physiological sigh. And so the way that that works is you're going to breathe in through your mouth, and then you're going to take another quick little sip of air through your mouth, or actually you can do it through your nose, and then you're going to sigh all of that air out. So it looks like, one more. And your heart rate will slow down, and it will lower all of those stress hormones. So now here's the thing. It will lower stress, but if you go right back into what you were doing, yes, your heart rate's going to speed back up, but at least it's hitting that reset, right? So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing that I do probably 3 or 4 days a week is something called non-sleep deep rest. Um, a, it's a name coined by Dr. Andrew Huberman, where basically it's a form of yoga nidra, if you guys know what that is. It's basically a combination of breathing and attention in your body. So what he does is he teaches you how to breathe, right? And then he has you focus on like your feet and what the sensation is on the bottom of your feet and what the sensation is on your hamstrings, and using breath and that attention, it gets your body to hit a pretty deep reset. I use it usually 3 or 4 days a week. I also will use it if I feel like I didn't get enough sleep. I'll do it first thing in the morning, but usually I do it midday. I actually just did a little bit ago. I did like 8 minutes. You can YouTube it. He's got them on there. You can YouTube Yoga Nidra. I will do Yoga Nidra once in a while, but the ones that I see on YouTube, I'm not a big fan of because they move so quickly with how they work. But those are easy ones that don't take a lot of time. Other things that you can do for stress management, for me, it's that I read romance novels before I go to bed because I don't care. Like, they're cute, you know what I mean? But it's like, whatever. I'm not like so involved in it that it keeps me awake. Leisure walking. So when you're doing your leisure walking, how you can tell if it's leisure walking or if you're walking too fast is, can you breathe out longer than you breathe in? Like, I'll catch myself every now and then starting to speed up. And if I can't exhale longer than I inhale, I know I'm walking too fast. What's the heart rate you should be at if sitting resting heart rate is at 68? For to hit restorative mode, Jan, what's the heart rate you should be at if sitting resting? So FYI, resting heart rate resting heart rate should be your heart rate right when you get up first thing in the morning before you're moving around. It's going to vary based on age. There's like a way to calculate it. Heart rate should be if sitting resting heart rate is 68. So for the leisure walking, you want to be below like 60% total maximum heart rate. So I'm probably confusing the crap out of you. So I would say I would use the breath test to figure out like if your heart rate is where you need it to be. Instead of trying to calculate it, I would say once you hit like that 60% total or maximum heart rate, do you guys know how to calculate that at all? So basically, hold on. You would take, I'm going to put it in the chat, 220 minus age times 0.6. right? That would be 60% of your maximum heart rate. You definitely should be below that. So somewhere between resting heart rate and then that 60%. Did that answer your question, Jan? I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly and also explaining it correctly.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay. So those are all stress management practices that you can try. It really is just about figuring out the things that work the best for you. Yes, massage. Yes, meditation. Yes, just listening to music, right? Yes, reading, doing some leisure reading. Yes to orgasms, ladies, by any means necessary. Orgasms, by however you need to achieve them, will put your body into a parasympathetic or relaxed state. Carbs. Carbs are stress management. I do this sometimes. I'm better with my sleep for the most part, but again, every now and then if my progesterone takes a real crapper, and I start waking up in the middle of the night and I can't, through breathing, get myself to go back to sleep, I'll come out and eat half a banana because carbs are comforting to your brain, right? So they help you manage stress. So those are just some ideas on how you can manage stress. Again, it's really just about figuring out like the options that work the best for you. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to talk about the hormone hierarchy. This is a simple systematic hormonal roadmap that shows you how this all falls into place. Now, I put together I'm going to stop sharing just for a second so I can pull it up. I put together a ebook, and I'm going to throw it in I'm going to email it to you. So when the recording of this goes out, I will attach it to that email. And then I'm going to do my best to see if I can get it to upload into the group. So fingers crossed it's not so big that it won't take it. But that's where you're going to be able to see this ebook. So I'll show you what it looks like. Whoops, not that. This. Hopefully this is what you guys are looking at. Yep, okay. Okay, so this is the hormone hierarchy, right? And I'm gonna just pull it up to this little triangle here. There's like, if you guys, once you go through it, like it's gonna walk you through, it's like 15 pages long. It goes through and explains things like the HPA axis. It explains to you in a very simple way how your sex hormones work. They actually work very much like twin sisters that are not identical, right? So, and to answer, I forget who asked it, what questions, what to ask for in testing. These are tests that you want to ask for when it comes to sex hormones. I will say that if you are in perimenopause, yes, still get tested, but because your estrogen is pinging around a lot of doctors will just say, it doesn't really matter. And we're just going to, give you HRT based off of your symptoms. That's why they're saying that, is because estrogen is just all over the place. She's pinging all over. She's very volatile. And I always call her, girls gone wild. Like she's just all over the place. But these are things that you can ask for. And then I'll get you guys the actual list for like the entire hormone panel that I recommend you get. And it's the one that I have my clients get, and one that I can help you get as well. I can get discounted pricing on labs. So this is the hormone hierarchy on how it works, right? So you'll see at the base of the triangle here, it's calories, but it really should say calories, leptin, and ghrelin, because those have the biggest impact on your metabolism. Ghrelin and leptin, and how you eat calories, how you intake food, that is going to have the biggest impact on your metabolism. Again, if you're battling hunger, cravings, your energy's in the toilet, like it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters, because those things affect everything, right? And then it's going to go to insulin and cortisol. Then they have the biggest impact on your ability to have a higher functioning metabolism. Now, because hormones don't work in a vacuum, if there's a breakdown in leptin and ghrelin, if there's a breakdown in insulin and cortisol, it's going to affect everything else. It's going to affect and put stress on your thyroid. It's going to affect your sex hormones, because keep in mind, if your metabolism has two jobs, keep you alive and reproduction. If you're doing something and your metabolism thinks it's so unsafe in your system that it can no longer support a baby, it will start to pull those sex hormones. We see it a lot nowadays, where women who are actually experiencing sex hormonal issues are popping up. And it's because it started down here. Started here, and then it progressed up into the thyroid and adrenal, and eventually it affected their sex hormones. So all of these work together. And then it goes up into estrogen and progesterone. So again, it's not that they are responsible for fat loss or your inability to burn fat. They have an impact. They are not directly responsible, but think about it this way. If my estrogen is dropping, and that means that I am now more insulin resistant, then that affects this little thing right here, right? And because insulin and cortisol can have a huge impact on your metabolism, that indirectly affects your ability to burn fat. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. So I will attach this. Again, it will be in the email that I send out. I will try and attach it in the group so you guys can have access to it there. It might be too big of a file. We'll see. All right, guys, that's it for today. Questions? Anybody have any questions? You can either throw them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Entirely up to you. I'll give you guys just a second if you have questions.
Leisurely walking. This is Jan.
Hey, Jen.
Hi. On leisurely walking, I occasionally play a video game, Pokemon, while I walk to just get my mileage in.
Yeah.
Now, is that not leisurely walking, or that? Because for me, it's kind of like an enjoyment, but then video games is it can be addicting for me.
What I would do is I would just do the breath test every once in a while. Like everybody I didn't know was like, oh, put your phone down. But it's like if there's a certain level of enjoyment to it and it actually calms you down, then it's fine.
Yeah.
If you find enjoyment in it, it should be fine. What I would do is just check in. Like as you're playing Pokemon, go, okay, let me just test my breath really quick. And you won't breathe this way all the time, but can you just really quick have an exhalation that is longer than your inhalation without really struggling? Then you know you're in a more relaxed state.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes. And then the other question, because on leisurely walking, I implemented a weighted vest for myself, just trying to get some get my heart rate up and down, basically,
Right.
rather than just walk.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's just a different thing. And we're going to go into this a little bit more tomorrow, but to answer your question, so there's something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's literally every movement that is not exercise based. So like I always use the example, like I talk with my hands a lot. That's NEAT. I'm actually burning calories. Like every time you see me switch around in my seat, right? Like that's NEAT. And so leisure walking can fall under that category. But that leisure walking is different than cardio walking. So there's something called LIS or zone two cardio, which is that like when we were running numbers, it's like that 65 to 70% of your max heart rate. I would use the weighted vest for that. They're just different. Now, when you're walking and doing the weighted vest and your heart rate is up a little bit, that still counts towards NEAT. That still counts towards movement, your steps. But it is different than leisure walking because one, you're focused on heart rate up, and one, you're focused on heart rate down.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And I do that all the time. Like we have a hill here. I hate doing cardio indoors. Hate it. Hate it. And so when it's not pissing down rain here in Seattle, and sometimes even when I was doing that, I'll just load my backpack up and I'll walk the hill to do LIS cardio. It's lower intensity, steady state cardio, right? So there's no intervals to it. It's just like keeping that 65, 70%. And you could do that. That would be a good thing to do for your cardio. Just keep in mind, just keep them separately in your brain. Good questions. Anybody else have any other questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, guys. I will get this uploaded and sent out via email. And then I will do my best to see if I can get the ebook sent into the group. But if not, just go to your emails and you guys will be able to find it there. And then I will hopefully see you guys all tomorrow. Have a great night. We'll see you later.